There's a gene that shouldn't exist in this concentration anywhere on Earth. It lives inside the lungs of more than a third of the people on a single island. An island so remote that the nearest hospital capable of treating what this gene causes is a 7-day boat ride away. The gene arrived 200 years ago, inside the bodies of 2 settlers who had no idea what they were carrying. Today, their descendants can't breathe properly, and they can't leave. This is the story of Tristan da Cunha. Not the story you've heard about the most remote inhabited place on Earth. That version is about distance and ocean. This one is about what happens when every good decision a community ever made becomes the architecture of a trap no one can escape. How does a gene from 2 people end up inside more than a third of an entire population? Why did a system designed to make everyone equal become the reason no one can leave? And why, when a volcano forced everyone off the island and they landed in a country with hospitals, supermarkets and jobs, did almost all of them vote to go back? To understand the gene, you have to understand the people who carried it here. 1816. The Napoleonic Wars had just ended. The British Empire needed watchposts across the South Atlantic to prevent any rescue attempt of Napoleon from his exile on St. Helena. Tristan da Cunha sat in the right spot. A military garrison was dispatched. When the garrison was withdrawn a year later, a few soldiers decided to stay. There was land, fresh water, a tolerable climate, and behind them, a Europe shattered by decades of war. Staying seemed like the rational choice. What they didn't account for was the ocean itself. The South Atlantic currents surrounding Tristan da Cunha are among the most violent in the hemisphere. Waves reaching 15 meters are routine in winter. Storms last weeks, and the only way on or off the island is a small boat navigating waters where a single miscalculation can be fatal. The first settlers realized the trap slowly. Ships passed every few months, sometimes once a year, and when they did pass, sea conditions prevented landing half the time. What started as a choice became the only option. Subscribe to Impossible Lands. In 2 minutes, you'll understand why the community that built the fairest society on Earth also built the cage no one could escape. Over the following decades, the settlers created something remarkable. Without regular contact with the outside world, they invented their own system. Every family received land to farm. There was no money because there was nothing to buy. Potatoes were grown communally. Livestock belonged to everyone. When someone needed help, the entire island responded. No hierarchy, no poverty. No inequality. A system so fair it would make political theorists jealous. But fairness had a price that was invisible for the first 100 years. By 1885, the population had reached 97 people, all descended from no more than 15 original settlers. Marriages could only happen between people already on the island. And with every generation, the family tree compressed further. Today, the roughly 235 residents share just 8 surnames: Glass, Green, Hagen, Lavarello, Repetto, Rogers, Squibb, Swain. 8 bloodlines for an entire population. What this means genetically wouldn't be fully understood until researchers from the University of Toronto arrived to study what was happening inside their lungs. According to studies published in the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine, approximately 36% of the island's population has been diagnosed with asthma. Not mild, seasonal discomfort. Severe chronic airway constriction requiring regular medication. On an island where medical supplies arrive roughly 9 times a year aboard a ship from Cape Town, 7 days away, the researchers traced this back through the island's genealogy. Historical records suggest that at least 2 of the original founders, including William Glass and his wife, may have carried genes associated with respiratory conditions. In a large, diverse population, those genes would have been diluted across millions of people. On Tristan da Cunha, they were amplified. Generation after generation of intermarriage concentrated the genetic material until what had been a minor predisposition in 2 individuals became a defining medical condition for more than a third of an entire community. Geneticists call this the founder effect. The islanders just call it life. But here's what makes this more than a medical curiosity. Dr. Noé Zamel and his team from Toronto managed to isolate a specific gene linked to asthma using the Tristan population, something that would have required tens of thousands of subjects in any other population on Earth. Because the genetic pool on Tristan is so uniform, so compressed, patterns that would be invisible elsewhere became unmistakable. The island that trapped its people genetically became, involuntarily, one of the most valuable genetic laboratories on the planet. The same isolation that caused the disease made it possible to study. So the first layer peels away. Tristan da Cunha isn't just remote, it's biologically sealed. Every child born here inherits not just the land of their ancestors, but their accumulated vulnerability. The ocean didn't just isolate these people geographically, it turned them into a closed genetic system where the past doesn't fade, it compounds. But if biology were the only trap, people would simply leave. They don't. And the reason reveals the second layer beneath the surface. There is no private land ownership on Tristan da Cunha in the traditional sense. Families have the right to use specific plots, but the land belongs collectively to the community. This means that if someone decides to leave, they can't sell their property. There's no asset to convert into money for starting a new life somewhere else. A person arrives in Cape Town or London with empty hands, no credit history, no recognizable work references, no professional network. Starting from absolute zero at an age when most people already have established careers, the egalitarian structure that protected the islanders for generations became a golden cage. Everything is provided within the island. Nothing is convertible outside of it. The system ensures no one goes hungry, no one is homeless, no one lacks purpose. But it also ensures that leaving means abandoning every form of security you've ever known, with nothing portable to take with you. And then there's something that rarely appears in the travel documentaries. On an island of roughly 235 people, where you've known everyone since birth, where entertainment options are limited, where novelty essentially doesn't exist, the psychological weight of monotony becomes a tangible force. The same faces at the same communal gatherings, the same horizon every morning, the same conversations cycling through the same topics. The community has developed rituals to counteract it. Celebrations for every possible occasion, fishing competitions, dance nights that involve the entire population. But between those events stretch weeks of identical routine. Research on isolated populations suggests that prolonged absence of new stimuli can measurably alter brain activity, a kind of cognitive recalibration where the mind adjusts its baseline expectations downward. The islanders aren't unhappy. They're calibrated for a world that would change fundamentally if the isolation ever ended. This is the second layer. The economy and social structure of Tristan don't just make leaving difficult, they make it nearly incomprehensible. When your entire existence has operated within a closed system, where money barely functions, where your value comes from what you contribute to the community, the outside world isn't just unfamiliar. It operates on rules you were never taught. But neither genetics nor economics fully explains why people stay. For that, you have to look at what happened in 1961. October. The volcano that forms the island began showing signs of restlessness. Earth tremors shook the settlement. The ground heated. Fissures opened behind the village. And then lava began flowing toward Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, the only settlement on the island. All 264 people were evacuated. First to uninhabited Nightingale Island in open fishing boats for one harrowing night. Then a Dutch passenger ship, the Tristan, happened to arrive the following day and took them to Cape Town. From there, they boarded the liner Stirling Castle to Southampton. Within weeks, the most isolated community on Earth was living in a former military camp in Calshot, Hampshire. What happened next baffled sociologists who studied the case. The British government offered the islanders everything Tristan couldn't provide. Modern healthcare, education, employment, housing with electricity, plumbing and heating. Supermarkets with choices the islanders had never imagined. A country where ambulances could arrive in minutes instead of days. The rational calculation seemed obvious. Stay, build new lives. Take advantage of everything the 20th century had to offer. Instead, the islanders experienced something they had never felt before. In interviews and reports from the period, a pattern emerged. On Tristan, every person had a role. The fisherman was essential. The farmer was essential. The person who repaired the boats was essential. In England, they were 264 anonymous people in a country of millions. No one needed them. No one noticed if they stayed or left. The skills that made them vital on the island were irrelevant on the mainland. They went from being indispensable to being invisible. When the Royal Society expedition confirmed the island was safe for rehabilitation, a secret ballot was held. 148 voted to return, 5 voted to stay. The margin wasn't close. It was overwhelming. They chose the volcano. They chose the isolation. They chose dependence on a ship that comes 9 times a year. They chose the asthma, the limited medicine, the identical routine. Not because they didn't understand what they were giving up, but because they understood something most people never have to confront: that being needed is more essential than being comfortable. That relevance to a community can outweigh access to a hospital. That identity isn't where you are, it's where you matter. Though it's worth noting the picture was more complex than a simple, unanimous return. Records indicate that roughly a quarter of the evacuees ultimately remained in England or returned there after initially going back. The decision wasn't easy or universal, but for the majority, the pull of the island proved stronger than the pull of modernity. This is the third and deepest layer. Tristan da Cunha isn't held together by geography or economics or even genetics. It's held together by something harder to name. A sense that this specific place, with these specific people, is the only context in which each individual fully exists. Remove them from the island, and they don't just lose a home. They lose the only stage where their life has meaning. And now, that stage is under threat from something none of them can control. The lobster fishery that provides roughly 80% of the island's revenue is facing pressure from multiple directions. The Tristan rock lobster, the species that sustains the community, lives in kelp forests that are already at the upper limit of their temperature tolerance. As ocean temperatures rise, the ecosystem that supports the lobster is shifting. Climate change isn't a distant abstraction here. It's a direct threat to the only industry that connects this island to the global economy. The community responded with something extraordinary. In 2020, this population of barely 240 people established one of the largest marine protection zones on the planet, covering more than 700,000 square kilometers and protecting over 90% of their surrounding waters. One of the smallest communities on Earth, managing one of the largest conservation areas. They maintained a regulated coastal strip for their lobster fishing, while closing the vast majority of their ocean to exploitation. Children on Tristan begin learning to fish for lobster between the ages of 5 and 6. By 16, they leave school to apprentice before becoming full-time fishermen. The relationship between these people and their ocean isn't economic, it's existential. The lobster isn't just income, it's the thread that connects them to the outside world. If that thread breaks, the island doesn't just lose money, it loses its only reason to remain connected to the rest of civilization. The ship from Cape Town, the SA Agulhas II, makes roughly 9 voyages a year. 9 windows to receive medical supplies, fuel, food, and mail. 9 opportunities for someone with a medical emergency to reach a proper hospital. The fishing vessels Lance and Edinburgh provide additional transport, but all of it depends on weather conditions that are becoming increasingly unpredictable. Storms in the South Atlantic are growing more frequent and more severe. When sea conditions prevent landing, there's no alternative, no airport, no helicopter range from any nearby landmass. The volcanic geography makes a runway impossible. The only door in or out is the ocean, and that door is closing more often. If the shipping windows narrow further, the island faces longer stretches without resupply, months without the medications that keep a third of the population breathing, months without the fuel that powers their generators, months where any medical crisis becomes a matter of survival by proximity to the island's small health center and nothing else. The equation is straightforward and merciless. The isolation that defined this community for 2 centuries could be the same force that ends it. And yet no one talks about leaving. There are no relocation plans, no public discussions about contingencies if the worst scenario materializes. Because for the people of Tristan da Cunha, the island isn't just where they live, it's who they are. 8 surnames, 200 years of shared decisions, a social system that exists nowhere else, a way of life that would evaporate the moment they scattered. They aren't defending a location, they're defending an identity that cannot survive transplantation. They built the fairest society on Earth, and it became the one cage no one could escape. There's a gene inside the lungs of more than a third of the people on this island. It arrived 200 years ago in the bodies of settlers who thought they were building freedom. It passed from parent to child, amplified by the same closeness that made the community strong. Today it constricts airways on an island where relief comes by ship 9 times a year if the ocean allows it. The gene can't be removed without unraveling the bloodlines that hold the community together. The economy can't be reformed without destroying the equality that defines it. The identity can't be preserved without the isolation that threatens it. 235 people on a volcanic rock in the South Atlantic, watching a horizon that grows emptier each year, breathing with lungs shaped by ancestors who never imagined what they were passing down. Choosing, every single day, to remain in the one place where who they are and where they are cannot be separated. The next destination on impossible lands is just as remote, but the trap there isn't genetic. It's something the residents built with their own hands, on purpose, believing it would set them free. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you on impossible lands.